This is a very, very troubling story out of Atlanta. You've all heard about this by now, for sure. The Stop Cop City activists hit with RICO charges by the same grand jury that indicted Donald Trump. This is a piece by Kelly Well from the Daily Beast. Georgia prosecutors have filed racketeering charges against 61 people accused of involvement with Stop Cop City, a protest movement against the controversial Atlanta police training facility, which is, for those of you who are not caught up on what it is, most of you are, $90 million fake city so that cops can practice different war games. The charges were filed last week, according to online court records. The list of defendants suggests that the case implicates people who have already been arrested on tenuous evidence, like a legal observer who was jailed while monitoring protests, activists who ran a bail fund for other defendants, and a trio of activists arrested while handing out flyers with the name of a cop who killed a fellow protester. The RICO charges come as Georgia's RICO statute receives national attention. Donald Trump and a collection of his associates were charged under the state's severe RICO statute last month. A person convicted on RICO charges in Georgia cannot be pardoned by the governor. Only the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles can issue RICO pardons in the state, and even then, only after a person has served 5 years of their sentence. So that's a nightmare. I mean, that's just an absolute nightmare if you're charged in that way. And because there's no, at least when the governor has pardon power, you could say there is at least some, if flawed and if indirect, there's at least some democratic check on the system. Some board of pardons and parole. I mean, who the fuck knows who these people are? Who votes for them? I mean, so this is just absolutely horrifying. The same grand jury, go ahead.
Basically, you're not getting out.
Right, you're not getting out. And you can't get out until you've served 5 years. Served 5 years. So, again, this is a horrifying situation. The same grand jury that indicted Trump on RICO charges also indicted the Stop Cop City defendants, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported on Tuesday. The Cop City Vote Coalition, a group that gathered more than 100,000 signatures to put the facility's construction up for a vote this year, meaning November, condemned the charges as authoritarian measures by the Georgia Attorney General, Republican Chris Carr. The group also noted that charging documents describe the alleged racketeering scheme as beginning before the police training facility was even announced. Further, the documents used the day that George Floyd was murdered as the date the alleged criminal acts began. Wow. Think about that. They used the date that George Floyd was murdered as the date the alleged criminal acts began, the group said in a statement. This is months before anyone was even aware of Cop City and is a clear assault on the broader movement for racial justice and equity. Carr's actions are a part of a retaliatory pattern of prosecutions against organizers nationwide that attack the right to protest and freedom of speech. How can they not be interpreted that way? How are you going to trace the beginning of this crime back to the murder of George Floyd? I mean, it's just nakedly political. Lauren Regan, executive director of the Civil Liberties Defense Fund, which has been working in support of defendants, said the scope of the case is designed to dissuade people from supporting the Stop Cop City movement. Quote, it's been very clear that Georgia's intentions in how they've conducted themselves regarding the resistance to Cop City has been to try and scare even above ground law-abiding participants from taking part, she told the Daily Beast. I think by roping a legal observer and people running a nonprofit and running a lawful bail fund is absolutely intended to scare people from supporting this cause now and into the future. Yes, absolutely an act of political intimidation. Marlon Kautz, one of the bail fund organizers named in the RICO charges, told the Daily Beast that the indictment was part of an effort to discredit activists. Quote, these indictments are just the latest chapter in a long-running campaign by Governor Kemp and Atlanta authorities to terrorize political activists. Since the beginning of the movement against Cop City, the Georgia AG has shown a willingness to abuse the legal process as a weapon against political opposition. Judges have questioned the constitutionality of their methods, and even local protester Sherry Boston has publicly condemned this prosecution as baseless and refused to participate. Make no mistake, this indictment is not about enforcing the law. It's a desperate overreach, an attempt to discredit legitimate political opposition, and it won't work, they said. So I certainly hope they're right about that. But I want to play a video here. This is a Democracy Now! Interview with activist Kiana Jones, in which she is asked specifically about these charges as motivation not only to dissuade activists from engaging in further protest, but in terms of dissuading the public to vote against Cop City. Because don't forget, these activists gathered well past the number of signatures they needed to bring this onto the November ballot as a straight up or down measure, Cop City or no Cop City. And given the political nature of these charges, she's asked, hey, do you think this is about swinging votes in November on that ballot referendum? Here's what she has to say about that.
Issue of the campaign for a ballot referendum against Cop City, the impact of something like these indictments on potential voters?
Oh, absolutely. This is the state's last desperate attempt to shut down the ballot referendum. We have been back and forth in court with Mayor Dickens and the city of Atlanta, also the state of Georgia, about the validity of this ballot referendum, which we know we have the right to under the Georgia Constitution, the same way Attorney General Carr went to the laws of the state of Georgia to throw together this RICO indictment. We searched the laws of the state of Georgia and the Georgia state constitution, and we know that we have a legal right to this ballot referendum. But instead, Attorney General Carr, Mayor Andre Dickens of the city of Atlanta have tried to tie us up in court to invalidate not only this referendum, but all referenda going forward, which is a very dangerous precedent that would be set, because what it says essentially is that if you don't like the laws that have been passed or something that's been done by your local government, then you would have no recourse. And I believe that that in itself is the ultimate pinnacle of anti-democracy.
Yeah, and that's a certain element of this that I think is worth bringing up, because they announced that they had the signatures on August 14th. Okay, then the city announced the process of verifying all these signatures was much longer and more complicated than they thought it was going to be. And so the activists then pulled the signatures back and said, we'll submit them later. And now, a couple weeks after that, you have these charges come down. So, you know, not only is this, I think, an act of intimidation against the activists, I think it is an act of political persuasion of the sleaziest kind against the voters of Atlanta to try and criminalize the entire Stop Cop City movement, and thus turn the public off to the Stop Cop City movement, because if they can get a yes vote, then the project moves forward.
Yeah, if this isn't fascism, what is? If that's not fascism, what is? Right? I mean, you have this running theme of going after people who challenge the government with these unbelievably draconian sentencing attempts, right? I mean, this where they can't get out in at least 5 years. I mean, that's horrible. You know, with things like this, I think of a line from Dune where Frank Herbert says, take an hour of a man's life and take a man's life. It's only a question of degree.
Right.
And when you take away 5 years, 10 years, God, 20 years, somebody's life, you only have one life, right? Whatever your spiritual beliefs are, right? I mean, this life, like you as Keaton Weiss, that's once.
Right, it's once.
That only ever happens once. And that is, you're robbing the most valuable thing a person has, the only thing a person has at the end of their life. That's not a joke. This is why we have fought so hard to defend against illegitimate prosecution. And unreasonable sentencing. I mean, it's in the Constitution. I would argue that a lot of this is cruel and unusual punishment, particularly when you look at the nature of the American prison system. I mean, if you grow up in a criminal underclass, as I did, everyone's fucking terrified to go to prison because, it ain't like going to prison in Norway, man.
No, you're right. That's a whole other element.
You're going to be subjected to absolute horrors that certainly qualify as cruel and unusual punishment by any reasonable standard.
And what better example of, hey, the reason you have to call it out when it's done against the right is because it'll get done against the left too, sure as you're sitting there. And now you have, an absolute textbook example of this being literally the same grand jury that indicted Trump on those RICO charges also thought it was worth indicting 61 Cop City activists for crimes that, as we read in the piece, handing out flyers accusing the cops of murdering the activist. His name is hard to pronounce, and I don't want to, out of respect for him, butcher it, so I won't say it. But I know who he is. Passing out flyers saying, hey, we think this is a police murder? That's against what law? They're violating a racketeering law by doing that, and they give away the game by tracing the criminal activity back to the date of the George Floyd murder. How can they say it any clearer than that? They are criminalizing political dissent by definition. No crime was committed during the murder of George Floyd except the murder of George Floyd, which the officer who killed George Floyd is now in prison for. You're going to trace this criminal conspiracy, racketeering back to that day? Makes no sense. It makes no sense except that you are sending a loud and clear political statement that we will crush you if you fuck with us. They are, the lengths they're going to, and this is a whole nother thing. This is why I said we can go down conspiracy rabbit holes all we want. Why are they going to such lengths to build this fucking thing if they're not going to use it to victimize their own people? Like, what? Like, you're this committed to getting this project approved that you're willing to go to these lengths? You're willing to just destroy the social fabric of your city and your state? And again, this is a Republican AG. I wanted to mention that. But of course, it's the Democrats in Atlanta who are trying to build Cop City. So you tell me who's the greater fascist here. It's a close call is what I'm saying. It's a fucking close call, right? And ultimately, it's a meaningless question. It's a meaningless question of who's worse, Republicans or Democrats. Look at the big picture. Look what's happening. Look at how terrifying that is. Terrifying that there's no way out. There's no appeal, apparently, in any real sense, because the only appeal that you could actually implement would be a political appeal of sorts, right? Just as Trump is talking about pardoning the January 6th people if he gets in. Maybe if a Democratic governor comes in, they might. Again, I say this might because who's offering this? Who's actually offering a lifeline here to these people who just woke up to the nightmare news that they're being charged on RICO charges, which means no even discussion of a commutation until you've already served 5 years. And even then, it's not with the governor. It's with some faceless board of what they call it, parole. I forget it's in the article I just read. Talk about a fucking nightmare.
Yeah. Your only hope would be to go to the federal system and argue that the laws in Georgia themselves are unconstitutional and constitute a de facto cruel and unusual punishment or violation of the right of equal protection because of the stipulation that you have to serve 5 years like that. It seems to me that you must be able to challenge that as unconstitutional on its face. But you know how many years it takes to bring a case like that and have it wind.
By the time you see any results from that, you've been better off going through the parole board or whatever the fuck they are. Yeah.
Right. Well, you might protect other people from the law in the end. I want to point something out. I don't usually get meta like this on the show, but it's unlike that. In some ways, when you're on YouTube, you're able to do something that even the big networks can't do. They have to wait until the Nielsen numbers come out, right? But we can see the numbers in real time when we're doing a show. And of course, we see the numbers when we do clips. So literally, the second we started covering this, we lost about 150 viewers, right? And it's always like that when we put up clips about this specific subject, and also low ratings Elon, as we're going to start calling him.
We lost viewers? Oh, we're at 748. I think we're doing well.
No, we were up at about 850. It dropped for a little while back down to 666. And then it gradually started coming back up.
I must not have been paying attention.
So now, yeah, I mean, it was no, like a light switch as soon as we started covering Cop City. So this is part of what I attribute that to, and of course, I can only theorize because while we can see the real-time view counts, we can't parse out who's watching or why. We are very proud that we have a viewpoint diverse audience. I am going to attribute that, I think, primarily to the fact that I think you have a lot of conservatives who don't want to hear about Cop City, right? Because they associate it with BLM and they don't like BLM and they think that way. But listen, if you watch our show, you know there are a lot of people on the left who very strongly advocate against things like the January 6th sentencing, as we did in this very same show. What we don't see are a lot of conservatives speaking out about things like this, right? In the end, it's the same fight. And the conservatives, if you consider yourself an open-minded conservative who's truly believes in certain fundamental rights and freedoms, and you like to watch shows like ours because you're saying, yeah, look, there are some cool Jew boy leftists out there. I didn't think so. Wow. Okay, well, you got to look at things like this, and you have to, on your side and with your folks, you need to tell them, no, you need to care about Cop City because they can do it to them, they can do it to us, and they are doing it to us, right? That's the unity that we need to form. That's the purpose of having a broad populist coalition fighting against this system. It can't just be people on the left saying, yeah, man, that's crazy to send this guy away for 22 years. There have got to be people who are more on the conservative side saying, what the fuck are they doing to those Cop City people for protesting?
Please clap.